Okay, so for this week, I've assigned you to read Donna Haraway's A Cyborg Manifesto. I'm just going to give you a little story background on this. When I was a senior, graduating senior in college, my professor gave me this article to read with no explanation, and my final exam was to take it home, read it, and to outline it. And it was a 16-page article, the way that she had printed it out, and I created a 16-page outline of all the points that were listed in the article. And the reason why I did this is because I had no idea what the article was saying. My professor didn't give me any insight into it. She just handed it to me and said, read it. This is your final exam. And I was confused as could be. So I've come up with an outline for you guys to follow along as I go through the article. And that will hopefully help you to understand this article. That will help you to understand this article. I do encourage you nonetheless to read the article first before you listen to this video, and then to read it again after you finish the video. It's going to seem like a lot of work, but this article is a seminal article in new media theory. It was published in 1991, and it's a very important article to be familiar with and to understand. And so it's difficult enough, but it's important enough that you're going to want to spend some time on it. Okay, so let's start with first things first. What do we typically think of when we think of a cyborg? I think we typically think of something along these lines, the Terminator. Somebody who is part human, part machine, usually male, very strong, and has superhuman capabilities. This is not the kind of cyborg that Donna Haraway is talking about. She says that cyborgs are in fact a part of our present rather than the future, and that there are three current border crossings that are becoming very blurry that we should consider to help us to grasp this idea that cyborgs are in the present. So first she talks about that there's a blurring between animal and human, and she notes that this is part of our mythology, that oftentimes in the past that we viewed these cyborgian creatures that are part man, part human, as being something mythological. And she points out to us that there's actually already currently a blurring of animal and human. First of all, we give animals rights these days. We actually talk about animals' rights, that they have a right to, a safe home and to love and friendship and burial and all the things that typically, historically, were not really conceded to animals. This is a relatively new thing. And so we're starting to treat animals more like humans by saying animals have rights. So there's a blurring of a boundary between human and animal. Secondly, we have to think about this too. We actually do, most of us, eat meat. And so once you consume an animal and it becomes part of you, then, there's that blurring between, where does the cow end and where does the person begin once you've eaten the cow. And then last point, she was writing during a time when there were advances in medicine being made, and it was a very contentious point that doctors were taking organs out of animals and putting them into humans, most famously heart valve transplants. We now use synthetic materials for that. But at the time, doctors were taking heart valves or arteries out of pigs and then putting them in humans' hearts who had blocked arteries. And so that was a very important and contentious debate at the time. So this is the first blurring, where humans and animals are not as separate as we typically think they are, that humans are not these autonomous creatures that we ideologically and ontologically, she uses that word a lot. Ontology basically just means, how do we conceive of one's being? How do we think about somebody as being a subject? That we now think of animals as similar to us. We also eat them, and they're used in medical technology sometimes. And actually, hidden inside of our bodies, where, where does the human part of the person's heart end, and where does the animal part begin, and vice versa. So that's the first blurring. The second blurring that she talks about is the blurring between the animal dash human. She's now conflated animals and humans as being in one category, and machine. So that's animal versus human and machine. And, we have a lot of ways to think about that. I like to think about it this way, is that, like, again, if we think about technology as any extension of ourselves, the glasses that we wear, so that we can work, so that we can read, so that we can see things, those give us sort of superhuman powers. Because if we didn't have that technology, that machine, the glasses, we wouldn't be able to see. Also, we have clothing, which is made by machines. We have tattoos that are made by machines and etched onto our bodies. We wear shoes. We wear fake hair. Again, we have glasses, fake eyelashes, makeup. These are all types of, technology or machines that we use to communicate our gender identity, our sexual identity, our social affiliations, who we think of ourselves. Also, there's a lot of arguments, I know, around Blac Chyna on whether or not she's had breast augmentation, bottom augmentation, things like that. So again, the integration of the machine into the human body of synthetic materials. And then lastly, and I want to keep bringing your attention back to this, she talks about text, writing as a machine, because writing shapes what we think, writing shapes how we think about the world, writing shapes how we communicate with other people. And so when we use a technology such as writing, when we use a technology such as verbal speech, to communicate with one another, then we're using technology, we're using machines that then shape how we think about ourselves, who we think we are, and how we interrelate with the rest of the world. So that's the third boundary between animals/humans and machines that is blurry. That makes us like cyborgs. And then the last thing she talks about is the blurring between our physical and non-physical worlds. The non-physical, which we now refer to as the virtual, is surrounding us all the time, and yet we don't tend to think about it a lot, about how we have our physical lives, such as right now I'm sitting in a chair in my room, in my office, talking to you. And then we also have our virtual lives, where, I have an identity and conversations that are going on in my social media, that are going on in my email, that I'm participating in through watching videos and stuff online. And even though, again, I don't tangibly own any of those things, I can't pick up my social media account and carry it around with me. It's not physical. It's not part of the physical world. It's part of the virtual world that is, exists on my computer and is run by things such as this. This is an image of an integrated circuit, or, what is commonly called a microchip, where there's lots of teeny tiny types of writing, as she mentions, and inside of all these different parts of the integrated circuit, and we can't see it, but yet it's running our computers and such. So an integrated circuit, I wanted to point you to a very simple definition of what an integrated circuit is. It is a circuit of transistors, resistors, and capacitors constructed on a single semiconductor wafer or chip, microchip, in which the components are interconnected to perform a given function. And this last portion of the definition is important because it's going to keep coming up throughout Haraway's article, where she talks about how we as humans are part of the integrated. So what I want you to pay attention to here is that basically what, in the three categories that Haraway starts from, is that cyborgs are not the future. We've always been cyborgs. We've always thought about ourselves as cyborgs, written about ourselves as cyborgs in myths. There's a blurring between animals and humans these days in the way that we think about them, and the fact that we eat them, and the fact that, they're integrated into us medically. And then the second boundary blurring, where it makes us cyborgs, is the blurring between human and machine, how we use technology in our everyday lives, and it shapes how we think about ourselves. And then also there's a blurring between our physical lives and our non-physical lives. So again, this is the most important point I want you to take away from this first section, is that humans are cyborgs. Now, throughout the article, she does talk a lot specifically about women. But what we're going to find as we go through this outline is that she's talking about women metaphorically as a word that can be used to describe all humankind. Now, I know for a long time, people in general were referred to as mankind. And everyone always said, oh, it's not a big deal. You know, mankind is just the neutral term for all of humanity. And then, you know, people started saying, no, that's not true because women aren't included under the umbrella of mankind. And so we kind of switched as a culture to saying humankind. Donna Haraway uses woman as sort of a neutral term for all of humanity. And that's going to become clear as we go forward. And some of you are going to find that very uncomfortable. And I want you to think about that. You know, how it feels to be lumped into a group that you don't actually symbolically or ideologically feel like you're part of, and how you can feel alienated that way. But she's meaning to use it as a way to make some significant points about how technology has affected our lives. And I'm going to be outlining those here as we go forward. She very similarly to Marshall McLuhan thinks that the important thing about technology is the way it affects the scale, pace, and pattern of our lives. And we're going to be jumping into the messiness of that. So she talks a lot about how there are various kinds of organizations within our world that actually work like the integrated circuit. And she focuses in part 3, the informatics of domination, on, quote, the major rearrangements in worldwide social relations tied to science and technology, end quote. And one of the examples that she used under informatics of domination is how biotechnologies, or the way that we create food, think of GMOs or genetically modified organisms as, you know, the things that we eat every day, all the synthetic food that we eat every day, you know, your Snicker bars and your genetically modified corn and your, partially hydrogenated oil and high fructose corn syrup, all of these things have become, she says that biotechnologies, these kinds of food technologies we have become indistinguishable from communications technologies. And the point that she's trying to make here is that the way that we get our food also is the way that we communicate with each other, like through language or through media, that both of these things are structured like networks, and both rely on the transmission of code for their functioning. So, again, she's making a correlation between the way the written word, text, the spoken word, is itself a code, you know, like HTML is a code, where food also operates under these networks, where in order for the whole network, the whole integrated circuit to work, in order to function, then technology has an impact on that. How we talk, how we use code in computers, how we grow our food, how we distribute our food, how we make money. All of these things are completely interrelated and dependent upon one another. And this is important because now we're working under what is called the New Industrial Revolution. This is explained in part 4, the homework economy outside the home. And I am going to explain that in our next video.